Alright squids, I am about to tear down this bike because if you watched one of my previous videos, I stopped the bike. You know, I was out riding on some back roads, I stopped the bike and I had a really hard time starting the bike back up. One, two. The only way I got it to start up was rolling it down a hill, and I never had that happen before. So what I'm thinking is that my valves might be off, and I think I'm going to check them. So in order for me to check the valves, I'm going to have to remove everything here. It's not too difficult, so let's go ahead and get started. Make sure that the engine is cold, because metals expand, so you don't want to take the wrong measurements off the valves. All right, first thing we got to do is get the shrouds off. Let's remove this bolt down here. This is the shroud, the plastic shroud. On this side, they come out pretty easy. So I think I'm just going to leave the shroud on the last bolt. Now let's remove this seat. There's a this is a 12 millimeter bolt. And now we should be able to lift up. Make sure you flip your gas to off so it doesn't pour anymore. But once we remove this, there is going to be some gas that's going to be pouring out. And, and here comes some fuel. I always like to wear gloves as well when I'm doing this stuff. Very simple system of having the fuel go down just through a little tiny hose like this. I like this a lot. You know, it gets the fuel right to the carb where it needs to be. Using a 10 millimeter wrench and socket and an extension, just simply too tight for what they need to be. The previous owner, I think he didn't do too good of a job with that. So there is the bolt, and there's another 10 millimeter that holds the other side of the tank, and of course the previous owner over-tightened this like crazy, so I'm kind of glad that I'm doing this. To unclip this, you push it down, just lift it up, and now it should slide backwards. Next step is getting the tank out. We removed all the bolts. You should try and remove the shroud, but if you can't, you should be able to kind of just push it out. And it's a very easy tank to remove. Frame is completely different than the xr650r, and it's quite an amazing little engine. And of course it's a 2000 version, but the frame is all aluminum and it's a beefy frame. It's rigid, you know. I think people really like this. And look at that carburetor. Look at the size of that massive carburetor. A lot of people uncork these, so uncorking is something that you only hear specific to the xr650r. And when you get this bike and it's stock, it's a very wimpy bike, and a lot of people think there's something really wrong with it. And then people uncork it and it really flows really well. It's a very common mod, and most of the time you're already gonna get a uncorked xr650. These little port covers here, and what I like to do, I like to clean everything around it. Get dirt everywhere. Luckily this bike was used more of a street bike because it's a supermoto, so it makes a whole lot of sense why the engine is still extremely clean. And I just use like some soap and water, and I like to clean the frame. I like to keep everything nice and clean. You have to remove our spark plug. The wire here is actually part of the vapor speedo and all of that. It kind of measures the temperature, so just pull this out. I don't want to ruin the wires. There we go. You're going to need one of these. This is what, a 5/8 spark plug wrench with an extension to get into the spark plug. You're going to remove that spark plug. You know, I'm seeing a trend in this bike that the previous owner put everything just a little bit too tight. You know, also, I think that this might be one of the reasons it was a little bit hard starting the other day. The spark plug is pretty nasty. Normally when you do a valve adjustment, you should remove this entire thing, but I was reading up online, and one of the things you can do is just remove this bolt, and there is a mark in there, the T that I think I probably don't even need to remove this, so I'm not going to try. If I can't do it without removing it, I'll just, take it out. But what we're going to do is going to put the 6mm wrench in here. Then I'm using like an extension here, and that's it. You just heard that snap. That means that it just broke loose. Make sure when you remove this using a 6mm wrench and key that there is a rubber gasket on it. Make sure it doesn't stay in the little port. So for a valve adjustment, you're going to need a set of feeler gauges, and you can see this is a metric one, and for this bike there's just a few sizes that you really need, but you can tell that I bent some of these because I have tried to fit them in different bikes and stuff. So you're going to need a set of feeler gauges. They're pretty inexpensive and they come as a set, so you don't really have to keep buying them. But on this bike it's relatively easy to adjust the valves, and that's something that I really appreciate from Honda, is having these type of valve systems instead of the ones that use shims that require a lot more work. You're also going to need a wrench like this to get into the socket or into the nut in the rocker arm. It's a 10mm. It is better having the ones that are closed, but this works for me. And then the only other tool you're going to need is a flat screwdriver that you're going to use to get into the screwdriver or the screw on top of that rocker arm. Very simple system. Don't need a lot of tools. And there are bikes like the xr650r. It uses the same sort of system, and that's a very modern bike. So something that I really appreciate from Honda is that they are still using this. xr650r that I really like is that the valves are adjusted, and all you have to do is remove these two bolts. They're 6mm and 6mm here. This is one side and this is another side. So this is normally called the intake because that's where the carburetor is, and this is the exhaust valves, which is facing the header. Remember, 6mm. And when you put it back, remember this is soft metal and you don't want to strip it. So I'm going to get on this side now. Using an extension, it makes it a lot easier. And once I break it, I just use my hands to kind of twist it out. There we go. This is the plate I just removed. Try to pay attention to this O-ring. Just make sure that it's not ripped. There's nothing wrong with it, because if it is ripped, I would just get a different O-ring. Let's remove the exhaust valve cover. On this one is a little bit harder because there's the radiator's in the way, so especially on the left side. A good way of removing the other bolt is just by reaching a small wrench this way and getting it on here and just undoing it with your hand. Make sure you hold on to the bolt when you're pulling it out. Alright, with both the covers off, we're able now to see the arms kind of move up and down. What the key is, if you move the bike, you should be able to reach like top dead center. I decided to put a jack underneath and lift up the bike because one of the problems is that I need to be on the left side to see where top dead center is, and using the kickstart, it could work, especially if you have somebody to help you, but I need to use the rear wheel to rotate the engine. One thing I'm going to be doing, I'm going to shift onto fifth gear, and you have to kind of move the wheel once in a while so it shifts. And the reason I'm putting it in fifth gear is that it'll be easier to rotate the rear wheel if it's in the top gear. Take my rear wheel and I will rotate it, and I'll pay attention to the mark over there. I see my intake valve going down at this point, so that means that my intake is going up. And you have to look in this hole. There's this notch right here, and when that notch hits the T, that means it's top dead center. There is an F. You get an F at first, and then you rotate the wheel just a little bit, and you should be able to find the T, and there's the T. Rotate the engine, or rotate the wheel, you should be able to see those rocker arms go up and down, And you want to find top dead center, so that intake is going down and now it's coming back up. So if you do this, that's how you find top dead center and how you adjust them. These are currently down, and when I rotate the wheel a little bit more, you will see them coming right back up. So the first mark that you're going to be seeing is an F, and shortly thereafter there's going to be a T. And the point is not to go past the T. And if you go past the T, you need to go back to your, or just crank it again. You don't want to go past it and then just come back. There's a little play on the rockers. I think we found top dead center. That's it. Now we can adjust our valves. Intake part, which is this that we're checking first, should be at 0.15. And with my 0.15 feeler, I cannot get in there. And I cannot get into this one as well. So what that means is that the feeler, or the this is way too tight. So what I'm going to do is take a 10mm wrench. There we go. It's pretty tight. And I'm going to loosen this one as well. Don't want to strip or do anything. You see I already backed out the nut a little bit by mistake. This is a 0.15 feeler gauge under that shim, and it should go in without any problem. The problem here with this is that it was way too tight. So I'm going to take the 0.15 and I'm going to slide it in. And I'm going to take a screwdriver. I'm going to back it up just a little bit. And it actually helps to have this in here so you're not backing up any of the... You want to slide this and feel. That's why they call it feeler gauges. This was way too tight on the intake, so there is a little drag. You can feel it. You can back it up. You can actually tighten it a bit, and you can see it's way too much. So that's perfect right there. So what I do now, I'll remove my feeler gauge. You want to put your screwdriver here and hold it to tighten the nut here, and we'll give it a little bit more of a twist, but I want to make sure that I can put the feeler gauge again, and you can see it actually goes in, and there's a little bit of a drag. So this is 0.15 on the intake. We backed up the nut a little bit, and this seems to be pretty good. I'll just take my fingers and I'll just tighten that nut for now, and I'll just kind of get like the feel for it. You want to hold on to the flat screwdriver and just tighten the nut. So now it's perfect. You see how it goes in? And there's a little bit of a drag to it too. The only thing we're going to do is just tighten and then we're going to measure this one again. Sometimes, like when I tighten things, it'll be a little bit too tight. So that's perfect. Both of these are at 0.15, and if it's too tight, sometimes I think it's fine. So there we go. So that comes in, and you can try putting a 0.17 just to see the movement this is, but you want to also tighten this well. And now let's do this again. That's my 0.15. This one's a little bit too tight. Yep. So this one's just a little bit too tight now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to loosen that one just a little bit. So I take these measurements over and over. It might be overkill. A lot of people do this quick. And that's where you put the shim in order to measure it. You can try different shims. Make sure that a 0.15 fits in here. That is the beauty of this bike. you know, there's like these little cover holes that make it easy to adjust valves. Now the intake side is just much more difficult just because there's much less of an amount of room to work with. But these are, the exhaust ones usually don't go out of adjustment very much. So most likely you're going to be in luck with it. But we're going to remeasure it and make sure that everything is up to spec. So on the exhaust side, it's a little bit of a bigger gap, 0.20. And it turns out that it's set correctly. So the only thing that went out was my intake. And that's what I hear. I hear that often the intake goes out of adjustment and the exhaust side holds on to the adjustment a lot better. This one was, of course, needing to be adjusted. This was way too tight. Not way too tight. It was tight. And I couldn't fit my 0.15 in there. And this one is 0.20 and it still fit. So that was good. I didn't have to adjust the exhaust side. All you have to do is just go in and tighten all of these bolts. Make sure you don't over tighten these bolts. People tend to make them way too tight, and then for the next person to do this, it's going to be a much harder job. And now our covers are in there. We are ready to start bolting everything up. One that was in the bike is a BKR7E, and the one that I'm putting in is a BKR6E. So it's just a different temperature, but it should light the bike up extremely well. My wrench, and I'm just going to put it in there. I do this by hand, so I have an extension, and I make sure that I thread it by hand. You don't have to tighten this very much, and I think I've seen people just put their spark plugs in there, and they just tighten it like crazy. Just putting our spark plug. We have a new spark plug inside the bike. I wanted to show you something very interesting. It's this choke. This is the choke of the bike, and it's so hidden. It's like a long piece of plastic, and there's 3 positions. This is the off position when it's down. This is the midway, and that is full choke. You always, on these XRs, they run pretty well. You don't need to even touch this. So just leave it like that. It's kind of interesting to show you the choke of a bike like the XR. I actually completely forgot that the choke was there because it just doesn't require you to touch the choke at all. It's such a well-tempered bike when it's running. Looping up these cables, all of the cables that we need, we'll just use these to lube, because might as well while we're here. Run this for now, or the fuel line. There we go. 1, 2. And it starts really well. Wonderful. Alright, the bike starts fairly quickly, so I think we've done well with the valve adjustment, and of course the spark plug definitely helped. Guys, that's how you adjust the valves on an xr650r. This sort of system applies to a lot of motorcycles, including the xr650l, but it's just a little bit different. So if you're interested in learning how to do the valves, there's a lot of people online that have done them. There's Jake the Garden Snake that he's very good. He made a very entertaining valve adjustment video, so his is really worth watching, especially for the xr650r. The only thing I'm going to be doing now is taking the bike out for a short stroll just to make sure that it's riding properly. So if you hear any sort of tappets or any weird noises coming from the engine, stop the bike and readjust the valves. But there shouldn't be any problems. It's a very simple system to adjust. And thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video. Finished adjusting the valves on the XR, and it took me, I guess, all morning. Normally somebody that's good will be able to adjust it really easily. There's a technique to starting this thing, but I'm not very good at it, so, but it sounds very quiet. So my intake valves were a little bit loud, And that might have been the case why it was difficult to start. Look, I'm going 26 miles an hour. It's like, Jesus, god damn. This bike is torture. Torture at this speed. Really not fun to ride at this speed, you goddamn Camry. Alright, now I'm going to stop the bike. It's hot. I'm going to stop the bike. And I am going to give it another kickstart to see if this bike will start. 1, 2. Ugh. Yeah, it starts right up. Well done. Well done to me. Alright, squids, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.